Baby, there is a man on this app who has stayed on the necks of his color redacted counterparts. And let me tell you, it warms my soul. All right, it just warms my soul. My favorite one so far is when he talks about how lazy his color redacted counterparts are, as far as, when it comes to slavery, factory work, all of that type of stuff. Because I actually Googled, because I like to, use my smartphone to continue being smart. And I was like, how long does it take for cotton to grow? It takes 6 months for cotton to grow. Stay with me, okay?
Hello guys, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. Now, there is a guy on TikTok that has really caused a lot of havoc on white people. He's a white guy talking about the ills that whites have caused to the global society. And he talks about a lot of pertinent issues that many whites are very afraid to talk about. And one thing that happened is that how community guidelines work on TikTok. His initial account was reported. Thousands of whites came and reported his account, and that account was brought down. He came back again with another account, and he's still injecting as he was injecting earlier. Let's watch.
White people have never even liked each other. And why would they? They're awful. White people love to act like they've built the most advanced, unified civilizations, but history suggests they've spent more time fighting, betraying, and resenting one another than actually working together. They waged wars of brutal conquest against their own neighbors. They divided themselves into endless class hierarchies where even the rich barely tolerated each other. Their royal families intermarried so much they caused genetic disasters rather than share power with outsiders. They built entire nations on the idea that some white people weren't white enough. Even today, their political and social divisions are so extreme that they can barely function as societies. At some point, we have to ask, if white people were truly the standard for human civilization, why have they spent history being their own worst enemy? White people spent most of their history slaughtering each other. The 100 Years' War, white people fighting white people for 116 years. The War of Roses, white nobles slaughtering each other for a throne. The English Civil War, white people fighting over how they should govern themselves. The Napoleonic Wars, France versus the rest of white Europe for nearly 2 decades. World War I and II, white people causing global destruction over their own internal disputes. Meanwhile, non-white societies built systems of cooperation. Many indigenous societies maintained peace through complex alliances and trade networks. African kingdoms built economic coalitions instead of destroying each other over minor grievances. Asian dynasties formed diplomatic marriages and power-sharing agreements to avoid unnecessary war. White people weren't building civilizations. They were just taking breaks between wars. White people's social hierarchies have always been built on hating each other. Medieval Europe was structured so that peasants suffered while nobles hoarded wealth. And they still fought amongst themselves. The Catholic and Protestant schism turned Christianity into an excuse for white people to unalive each other for centuries. Aristocrats in every European country looked down on merchants, who looked down on laborers, who looked down on beggars. Pure misery from top to bottom. Even within the same country, they developed regional and class-based divisions that kept them in constant conflict. They created strict racial hierarchies that excluded certain white groups, such as Irish, Italians, and Slavs, until it became politically convenient to include them. Meanwhile, other cultures built more flexible social systems. Indigenous societies often had communal governance rather than rigid feudalism. African and Middle Eastern cultures allowed for social mobility through trade, skill, and leadership. Asian dynasties promoted scholars and civil servants over bloodline alone. White people weren't uniting society. They were dividing themselves into misery. White people's royal families were too busy betraying each other to maintain stability. European monarchies relied on fragile marriage alliances that constantly collapsed into war. They intermarried so much they gave themselves hemophilia and other genetic disorders. Kings and queens were regularly assassinated, overthrown, and executed by their own relatives. The French, English, and Russian monarchies were all wiped out by their own people out of sheer hatred. Even today, European royal families barely tolerate each other, holding centuries-old grudges. Meanwhile, non-white monarchies maintain stability longer. China's dynastic system lasted for thousands of years, adapting to maintain power. The Ottoman Empire incorporated different ethnic groups rather than just inbreeding its rulers. African kingdoms often had check on royal power through councils and elders. White people weren't ruling effectively. They were playing a generational game of betrayal. White people have never even agreed on who counts as white. The British didn't consider the Irish fully white for centuries. The US didn't consider Italians or Eastern Europeans white until the mid-20th century. The Nazis reclassified entire groups of white people as subhuman when it fit their political agenda. Even today, white people argue over who is truly white based on ancestry, culture, and arbitrary rules. Meanwhile, other cultures didn't waste time on this nonsense. Most non-white societies recognize cultural identity over arbitrary racial purity. Many indigenous groups welcomed outsiders into their communities through marriage or adoption. African, Asian, and Middle Eastern civilizations absorbed new groups rather than excluding them. White people weren't defining race. They were constantly moving the goalposts. Even in the modern day, white people can't get along with each other. Europeans still hold centuries-old grudges against neighboring countries. Americans are politically divided to the point of complete dysfunction. White nationalist groups argue over who is pure enough to join them. Conservatives and liberals within white societies hate each other more than they hate their supposed common enemies. They spend more time fighting over regional accents and cultural differences than actually resolving their problems. Meanwhile, other cultures focus on collective survival. Indigenous communities emphasize cooperation over ideological purity. Non-white resistance movements prioritize shared struggles over minor differences. Black, Latino, and Asian political groups often unify around common causes despite cultural diversity. White people weren't creating stable societies. They were just keeping their infighting interesting. If white people were truly the most advanced societies, why have they spent history at war with themselves? White people have always had way too many dogs because they have always needed something to control besides other people. White people's obsession with dogs isn't about companionship, it's about domination. From European aristocrats hoarding hounds like status symbols to settlers using attack dogs to enforce slavery and colonization, white societies have long treated dogs better than people, as long as they were obedient. They bred dogs to enforce social hierarchies, hunting hounds for nobles, attack dogs for slaves. They prioritized dog breeding over feeding the poor, even when their own economies were in collapse. They weaponized dogs against enslaved people, indigenous communities, and their political enemies, because why do your own dirty work? They humanized dogs while treating actual humans, especially black and brown people, like animals. White people today pretend like their dog obsession is about love, but historically, it was about hierarchy, power, and violence. White elites have always used dogs to reinforce class hierarchies. In medieval Europe, dogs weren't companions, they were status symbols. In feudal Europe, hunting dogs were luxury items. Commoners were banned from owning them. Greyhounds, bloodhounds, and mastiffs were legally restricted to nobility. Owning a well-bred hunting dog was as important as owning land. It showed that you were better than the peasants. White elites treated dogs like extensions of their own power. Poachers, aka starving peasants, were executed if caught with a noble's dog breed. Dogs were bred to enforce class control. Bloodhounds didn't just hunt deer, they hunted people. Even in times of famine and war, aristocrats spent fortunes on their dog kennels, because their dogs meant more to them than their subjects. And yes, the white obsession with purebred dogs comes directly from their obsession with racial and class purity. White settlers didn't just own dogs, they used them as colonial weapons. Wherever white people went, so did their attack dogs. Spanish colonizers used war dogs to terrorize native people. Columbus and Cortez didn't just bring swords, they brought mastiffs trained to rip native people apart. Dog terror was a colonial strategy, letting their war dogs feast on native peoples in public executions. They justified it by calling native people subhumans, but gave their dogs full military honors. Dogs were used to enforce slavery. Enslavers bred Negro hunting dogs specifically to chase, maim, and unalive escaped slaves. Bloodhounds and mastiffs were trained to track black bodies across plantations. Runaways feared the dogs as much as the slave catchers, because once they were set loose, it was over. Settlers also used the dogs to control Native Americans. During westward expansion, U.S. soldiers used attack dogs against native resistance fighters. These same Indian hunting dogs were later rebranded for police forces. While native people were driven onto reservations, white people built entire industries around sport hunting with dogs. White people have never just been dog lovers. They have always used dogs to reinforce racial and class order. White people have always prioritized dogs over human lives. If there's one thing that white elites hate, it's helping the poor. But if there's one thing they'll always fund, it's breeding dogs. During the Irish potato famine between 1845 and 1852, British landlords let millions starve, while continuing to fund elite dog kennels. During the Great Depression, rich white Americans kept their purebred dogs in luxury, while their neighbors starved. During apartheid, white South Africans refused even basic education for black children, but spent fortunes on breeding and importing European hunting dogs. If given the choice between saving a dog and saving a starving human being, white elites have historically chose the dog. And this mindset is still alive today. White people will donate millions to animal shelters, but ignore poverty in black and brown communities. They'll cry over a police dog getting shot, but justify cops killing unarmed black people. They'll campaign for dog adoption harder than they'll ever campaign for racial justice. White people have always seen some humans as less valuable than animals. White people invented dog racism while pretending to be against it. White people obsess over purebred dogs because they invented blood purity in the first place. Eugenics, the science of breeding superior humans, was modeled after dog breeding. Mustache Man Who Shall Not Be Named was obsessed with German shepherds and promoted breeding programs for both dogs and people. White aristocrats wrote entire books about how mixing dog breeds was as dangerous as mixing races. Even today, white people assign race to dogs. Pit bulls, aka black dogs, are criminalized, while golden retrievers, aka white dogs, get a pass. Black dogs get adopted less from shelters because white people unconsciously associate them with danger. Police forces breed and train attack dogs the same exact way they did in slavery and colonial wars. White people invented racism, then applied it to their own pets. White people's dog obsession is an escape from their own social decline. They refuse to have kids, but will raise 3 Labradors like their biological offspring. They feel disconnected from community, so they turn dogs into their emotional crutches. They want unconditional obedience, so they choose dogs over humans. White people's dog obsession is about control, not love. That's why they ignore human suffering while spending millions on pet pampering. That's why they cry when a police dog gets hurt, but justify police aggression against people. That's why they advocate for animal rights while voting for politicians who gut social programs for children. White people treat dogs better than humans because they don't challenge whiteness. Dogs don't talk back. They don't demand reparations. They don't compete with white men for jobs, and they don't expose white privilege. Until now. White people don't love dogs. They love what they represent: obedience, control, and unconditional acceptance. White people's dog obsession isn't about love. It's a historical reflection of how they see the world. Some humans deserve loyalty and care. Others deserve to be hunted and controlled. And the best companions? The ones who never question their master. White people don't own dogs. They need them. Because without them, they'd have to face the fact that their entire civilization is built on dehumanizing everyone else. Cope.
I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret about white people. Every single white person knows somebody who is racist. Racist towards black people, racist towards Spanish people. We all know somebody. It might be our family member, it might be a distant relative, it might be a coworker, it might be an old friend, but we all know somebody. Personally, I come from a whole family of racist people. Yeah, my entire family is Republican too, okay? My dad's parents are racist, and my mom's parents are racist, okay? So I'm literally going against everything by talking about this. I am putting my own life on the line by speaking about this, and that's what we all should be doing. See, we could have ended this a long time ago, but people like my mom listened to these racist comments that their parents were making and didn't speak out against it. They kept their mouths shut, or they agreed with them silently, but they didn't do anything about it. They continued to let this be passed on generation after generation. Oh, my mom never told me or taught me any racist ideologies. She continued to let it happen because she didn't speak out against it when her parents were talking about it, or my dad's parents were talking. So if you are against racism and you are against discrimination and you're a white person, you need to speak out about it. Otherwise, you are allowing this to continue generation after generation, and you are just as much a part of the problem as anybody else.
Baby, there is a man on this app who has stayed on the necks of his color redacted counterparts. And let me tell you, it warms my soul. All right, it just warms my soul. My favorite one so far is when he talks about how lazy his color redacted counterparts are, as far as, when it comes to slavery, factory work, all of that type of stuff. Because I actually Googled, because I like to, use my smartphone to continue being smart. And I was like, how long does it take for cotton to grow? It takes 6 months for cotton to grow. Stay with me, okay? So it takes cotton 6 months to grow. And if you want to get on a boat from here to West Africa, it takes 2 months to get there and 2 months to get back. So that's 4 out of the 6 months. Okay. All they had to do was wait an extra 2 months and then just pick the cotton. You would rather waste time, money, resources to go travel along rough seas. Okay. To go pick up somebody to do a job you don't feel like doing. If that is not the epitome of lazy, I don't know what is. That's why every single time a Casper concubine or a fellow cornstarch crusader calls us lazy, it ain't nothing but projection.
Now, from listening to him, I'm sure you now understand why most white people who watched his videos decided to report him, because he's kind of revealing some things that they are very uncomfortable with. They don't want to hear about the things they have done to blacks. They don't want to be blamed. They only want to be praised and done for good things. So I really appreciate the fact that he could come out and talk, and he has insisted that he won't be stopped. He will continue doing what he does best and educate the public. So this is very, very necessary to listen to and even to watch, because there are some things that most people are shying away from speaking about. So many white Americans feel angered when their peers defend and support black people, because it challenges deeply ingrained beliefs and threatens their sense of identity, status, and security. For some, whiteness has long been an unspoken privilege, conferring advantage in wealth, opportunity, and social standing, historically reinforced by systems like Jim Crow and redlining. When white allies advocate for black rights, it can feel like a betrayal, exposing cracks in the myth of meritocracy and forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about racial inequality. This anger often stems from fear of losing economic or cultural dominance in a society where black empowerment is seen as a zero-sum game. If black communities gain ground through affirmative action, reparations, or even vocal support, some whites perceive it as a direct erosion of their own position. Defending black people can also be viewed as a disloyalty to a tribal identity, where whiteness has historically united against perceived outsiders. Moreover, white allies are sometimes seen as sanctimonious, wielding moral superiority that shames others into defensiveness. This resentment festers when systemic racism is called out, as it implicates all who've benefited knowingly or not. Rather than introspection, anger becomes a shield, deflecting guilt and preserving a fragile sense of innocence. That is just the thing. I think he should continue speaking, and he's done us proud by exposing these things, because sometimes when black people talk about the things whites have done to them, they are always not taken seriously. Whiteness, sometimes they don't even take anything said by blacks seriously. So tell me in your comment section what you think about it. And if you're watching us for the first time, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.